Today's topic is the hardest for me to talk about. I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you who will survive a nuclear attack and who will die. This subject has been studied in great detail by a very smart man named Herman Kahn, who's no longer with us. He wrote a book called On Thermonuclear War, in which he discussed many possible scenarios, what would happen during the nuclear attack, but more importantly, he went into great detail on what would happen after. And his conclusions center on two Americas. He divided us into what he called Country A and Country B, and what I will call urban and rural America. The 50 largest cities in this country would be targets in an all-out attack. An all-out attack of the sort that only a few countries like Russia and China would be able to mount against us. In such an attack, the targets would be our military bases. So cities like San Diego and Roanoke, Virginia would be the first to go, along with the areas around our missile fields in the center of the country, principally North Dakota and south from there. And the largest cities. No doubt Washington, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco would all be on the target list. But we're going to assume for this first argument that the target list goes through all of the 50 largest cities in the United States. Now, there was a time when this country had a system called civil defense, which included fallout shelters stocked with food and water and radiation counting equipment and so on. That was during the days when the atomic bomb was the nuclear weapon we had to fear. But as soon as hydrogen bombs came into being, the people who run America's civil defense gave up. They decided that there just was no way for anyone in a large city or near a military base to survive a massive nuclear attack from one of our mortal enemies. And so we have virtually no civil defense today. So what I have to tell my fellow city dwellers, I live in one of the 50 cities on the list, and I have to tell you that we would all be dead. Either vaporized if we live downtown, or caught up in an enormous firestorm if we live in the suburbs. If all of the attacking missiles and other weapons got through to their targets as planned, we would all be dead. The only country remaining would be Country B, the rural country. And then Herman Kahn went on to discuss how the rural country could in fact rebuild America. They would have to do it because there wouldn't be anybody left from the urban country. The time it would take to rebuild America would depend on the number of people killed in the attack. And we're talking here millions or hundreds of millions of people being killed in the initial attack. In that case, I have to speak now to my rural watchers. You're not going to get off scot-free either, because there will be fallout that will come to your areas. And you need to be able to know where that fallout is and how intense it is. And for that, you're going to need a radiation counter, like this little Geiger counter here. A radiation counter gives you one important piece of information. You hear those clicks? That's the radiation background here in my studio. Now I'm going to just bring a small piece of uranium ore close to this counter, and you'll see that immediately the clicks get very fast. But even this rate is not dangerous. I'm not injuring my hand by holding this uranium ore in it. The thing you need to understand about fallout is that almost all of the radiation in fallout is very short-lived. There is some which will decay in seconds, some in minutes, some in hours, days, etc. So what you have to do is, as soon as the bomb drops, you have to get under cover. Preferably underground, as deep underground as you can go. And you have to have a radiation measuring device with you so you know whether you are in a relatively safe area or not. So that means you got to buy one and put it in your basement or wherever else you would shelter. The thing about this radiation is that in 3 to 5 days, it would probably be safe for you to come out of cover. But you won't know that unless you have an instrument that can tell you how radioactive it is. Now, there are established dose ranges for exposure to radiation. You can't take these too seriously in the event of a nuclear war because these are all for peacetime. These are low. These are extremely low, in many cases so low that it won't hurt you at all to be exposed to this kind of radiation. But in an emergency, such as the wake of a nuclear war, you have to increase the dose range that you will tolerate. Increase it twice, 5 times, 10 times, if necessary 100 times. You've just got to get to the lowest level of radiation that you can find as quickly as you can and stay there until the fallout decays. Another thing that you can do for yourself is to buy some potassium iodide pills. You can get these on the web. You can check below this video. I have some links to some of these things. Potassium iodide is especially important because one of the dangerous radioisotopes contains iodine, radioactive iodine, and this stuff will gather in your thyroid glands, in your neck. This is about the last place you want to have a whole lot of radiation. So what you do is take potassium iodide, non-radioactive potassium iodide, and it will basically saturate your thyroid glands so that you will pick up very little from the surroundings, the food and the water that might be contaminated with it. Okay, this catastrophic view has corresponded to an all-out war against a well-armed nuclear enemy. But probably the more likely thing to happen will be a smaller, limited attack on perhaps a few cities or a few nuclear bases. In this case, most people will survive. But the warnings against fallout still apply. Whether it's a single small nuclear weapon or hundreds or thousands of H-bombs, there's going to be radioactive material scattered around, and you have to avoid it. You avoid it by seeking shelter. You avoid it by staying in that shelter for days until it subsides on its own. There's nothing really that you can do about it. If you tried to go up and wash the radioactive fallout off your house, the person who did this would be a goner. Perhaps other people in a sheltered situation might do a little better, but it's probably unnecessary. You just have to wait. These isotopes have short lives, and if you are able to wait out the short lives, you'll be okay eventually. But there's another factor that I need to mention to you as Americans. America is different from most other countries because America is heavily armed. There are a lot of people with a lot of weapons. Today in America, there are more weapons than people, in fact, although the number of people who own them is relatively small. So, wherever you are after a nuclear attack, large or small, you can expect armed people to descend on you. And you have to decide for yourself how you want to prepare for that and what you think you can do to help yourself in the case of armed people descending on you. So, to summarize, in a big attack, at least half of America dies. The urban half. The rural half, by and large, survives unless you happen to be near a military base of some kind. In a small attack, it'll probably be only a few cities that are destroyed. Everybody in the cities dies. Everybody outside has to deal with armed people fleeing the cities. Don't expect help from the government. You saw what happened after Katrina. You saw, more importantly, what happened after the hurricane hit Puerto Rico. The government, under the current management, is very poorly organized. It will take them a long time to get to you, and a whole lot of bad things will have happened in that long time. So you have to have some preparations for yourself. Things like solar generation of electricity so that you're not completely without electricity. Things like water supply that you can rely on. And a certain amount of food to get you through the worst of it. So, my advice to you is prepare if you want to survive. If you're old like me, you might just say, hell with it. I've lived for a long time. I don't need to spend the last years of my life in a radioactive hell. But I'm old, you're not. Do what you need to do.